Today I'm going to be showing you how to do large brush pen lettering. So it's a little bit different than using a small brush pen, and of course different than using a pointed pen or just a fine liner marker. So I'm super excited to get into this fun style with you, so let's jump in. I wanted to show you really quickly everything that is in your workbook. So when we start here, you're going to see there's these monoline strokes. And I included these because we have a lot of new people who've never gotten the box before, but this is the pen that you would use for these. I'm not going to be providing the workshop for this one. You can find it with past boxes, but I did want to include it in here so that you could practice those basic strokes. It goes through the lowercase letters, connecting letters, the uppercase letters, and an all caps set. Then we start getting into the large brush pen. So the whole second half of the workbook is all about using your large brush pen. So it will go through the basic strokes, the lowercase letters and the uppercase letters. And then there's also the Valentine lettering printable that has actual examples with large brush lettering and monoline lettering that you can actually put on your Valentine's cards and notes. What you're going to need today is the workbook that has all of our practice in here. We've got our basic strokes, we've got our lowercase letters and uppercase letters. You're also going to need a large brush pen. So this is a Tombow brush pen, and it's a dual brush pen. So you can see on this side we have the large tip for our large brush lettering, and the other side has a fine liner marker, which is really fun as well. The first thing I want to walk you through is just how to work with your brush pen. If this is a new tool for you, then I'm so excited for you to learn this, and I just want you to know that we'll take it step by step. So when we're working with a brush pen, there's a few things that we can do to make it a little bit easier. The first thing is where we're going to hold the pen. So when you take the lid off, you can see that there's this top section after the tip, and it's right around here or just above in the smooth section is where we're going to want to hold it. And you don't really need to change the way that you hold the pen. This is how I normally hold it, resting on my third finger. If you rest on your fourth, if you do something like this, it's going to work out how you hold it, but you do want to hold it about in this area right where it starts to get smooth. The next thing that you want to consider is the angle of your pen. So if I were to hold it at a 180-degree angle, it would be totally flat and I wouldn't even be able to write with it. We also don't want to hold it straight up and down at a 90-degree angle. We want a nice 45, so we're going kind of halfway in between the straight up and down and the 180 to get a 45-degree angle. And the reason why is we're going to get a full range of brush stroke by doing that. So if we're to hold our pen sideways like this and just make some lines, you can do this with me, you can see you can get some really wide dots and strokes. If we hold our pen more straight up, we can see we can get really fine dots and strokes. But what we want to do is we want to be able to get both in a letter and a stroke. So if we hold it at a 45, we can get both that really fine and we can get a really wide line. The next tip is using pressure. So anytime that we're going to be moving our pen in an upward direction, we're going to be using light pressure. We're not going to be pressing down very hard. We're just moving up lightly. Anytime we move our pen in a downward direction, we want to press down, therefore creating a thicker line. So that's something to remember as we're going through the basic strokes in the letters. Anytime you're moving your pen up, you're going to have a thin line, and anytime you're moving your pen down, you're going to have a thick line. One more thing with the way that you hold your pen is you want to have a light grip. So we don't want to be squeezing so hard that we're tiring out our hand. We want a nice loose grip so that I could walk behind you and just pull it right out of your hand. And the last thing is that you want to have a range of motion. We don't only want to just be using our wrist as we're lettering. We want to use our whole arm and move it up and down. And so the reason why, say we want to do a downstroke. If we just use our wrist, if I only bend my wrist, eventually I just can't keep going anymore. There's nowhere else for me to go. If I use my whole arm, I can keep going as long as I need. So we want to make sure that we're using a whole range of our arm motion and not just our wrist. Those are the tips. You want to make sure that you're holding your pen just above this smooth area. Hold it how you normally would. You want to use a light grip. We're using light pressure when moving up, heavy pressure when moving down, and we're going to be using our entire arm as we're lettering. The very first thing I always teach when teaching any type of lettering style is the basic strokes. These are so important, and really if you can learn and master these, then you can learn and master lettering. So I just wanted to show you what we're looking at here. We have some basic guides that kind of are reminiscent of what you did in elementary school, but I was just going to tell you the names of these different lines. So here we have what's called the base line. That's where the base of almost all of the lowercase letters sit. We have the waistline, think halfway up your body. That's where most of the lowercase letters come up to, where most of these basic strokes come up to this line. We have this ascender line up here. This is any letter that has a portion of it that ascends above the waistline is going to come up to that point. The descender line is any letter that has a portion of it that descends below the baseline will come down to this descender line. And then of course we have this angle line here that's going to help us get that traditional angle look that's traditional in calligraphy. So what we have here in the workbook is I have the different guides and some space for you to practice, but you also on the back of your workbook you have some tracing paper, or you can just get some Canson marker paper. And I love this because you can put it right over the top and you can see that you can still see through it, so you can do some tracing. The other thing with brush pens that you want to consider is the smoother the paper that you use, the longer your tip is going to stay intact and not get frayed. So if there's not a problem, you can do it on rougher paper, or you can letter directly on this paper in your workbook, but to prolong the life of your brush pen, smoother papers are going to be best, like this Canson marker paper. So this first one, we're going through all the basic strokes. This first one is called the upstroke, where you're going to start at the baseline and you just have a slight curve up to the waistline. So you trace the first one and then do a few more. Next we have what's called a downstroke. This one we're using pressure because we're moving in a downward direction. We're going to start at the waistline and we're going to go down to the baseline. So you can draw it right over that angle line if that helps, or just watch the angle line to help you get a consistent angle on your downstroke. So we've got our upstroke, our downstroke. Remember, moving up, we're going thin, down, we're going thick or heavy pressure. Next is the overturn. And what you can do is, if you want to save paper, to save some of your marker paper, you can kind of rearrange your paper as you go down so that you use all the space on your paper. So here we start at the baseline and we're going to use light pressure, come up, and we're going to transition to heavy pressure and come back down. So there's this little transition area that's happening here where we're transitioning from light to heavy pressure. So again, we start at the baseline, come up, transition to heavy pressure. This is an upside down U shape, and we still want it to follow that angle line. So you can have the angle line be right in the middle. You could start drawing on the angle line, but that's the overturn. Next we have the underturn. This one's the reverse of the overturn, where we're starting at the waistline with heavy pressure, coming down, release to lighter pressure, and come back up. For me, this is a harder stroke than the overturn because it's harder to get a smooth transition there. The key is to go slow. Heavy pressure, transition to light pressure. Next is a commandant. This is very similar to this underturn where we're starting at the waistline, but instead of going all the way down, this is where the baseline is. We're going to come halfway down. So we start with heavy pressure and then we just come up. Heavy pressure, come up. And if you get any spots like this where it didn't quite fill in, you can just go back and do a quick touch up. Next we have the compound curve. This is a combination of the overturn and the underturn. So if we start at the baseline and we're going to come up to the waistline, transition to heavy pressure, transition to light pressure, and come back up. So trace the first one and then try a few on your own. And again, the key to these smooth transitions is going to be going slow. And even for me, that's hard. You want to go fast. We just want to get it done. But the slower we go, the better our transition from thin to thick lines is going to be. And lettering really is a slow and quite a meditative process. Next we have an O form. This one we're going to start at the 2 o'clock position if the O form were a clock. So we start here, we're moving up with light pressure and we're going transitioning to heavy pressure, transition back to light, and connect. So 2 o'clock, and we need to start at the 2 o'clock position because we have to have time to get into that transition to heavy pressure. And really what we want is something more in this range. If you notice, this one has a lot more of a weight and thickness here on the bottom. And it's called a soggy bottom. And what we want to do is just go a little slower and just make sure that we're transitioning all the way to light pressure when we're down here on the bottom. That's the O form. Next is the ascending loop. We start at the waistline. We're going to curve up to the ascender line, and we're going to come back down to the baseline. So again, waistline, light pressure moving up, coming down with heavy pressure. Again, I'm not sure why, but transitioning from a light to heavy pressure is easier for me. You may find that as well. And then we have the descending loop as well. We're going to start at the waistline. We're doing heavy pressure, transitioning to light pressure, and up. So heavy pressure, transition to light, and up. If you've never done any type of brush lettering, I would say that using a large brush pen is harder than a smaller one. A smaller brush pen is going to have a smaller tip, so it's a little bit easier to control and it's less flexible. But this is still totally doable and something that you can learn, especially if you're willing to put in a little bit of practice with these basic strokes. If you get something like this where it didn't quite come out right, you can just add another line to kind of finish it off, clean it up. There's one more basic stroke that I wanted to show you, and it's called a reverse O form. So if you remember on these O forms, we started at 2 o'clock, we worked our way this way. A reverse O form, we actually start more at the 7 o'clock position and we work up, down, and connect. So we're starting here and working this way. So one more time, we start here, work, whoops, start here, work around, and connect. So this is going to be used on the letter B, K, and P. But those are all of the basic strokes. So anytime you go to practice lettering, I always recommend you spend some time here working on these basic strokes, getting more familiar and comfortable with them, because it's going to help you when you start to do your lowercase letters. I wanted to show you really quickly how you connect these strokes. So really what we're doing is we're just squishing them together. So if we take the letter A, for example, we would be doing an O form, just like we practiced, and then we would add an underturn to it, and that gives us the letter A. Say we wanted to do the letter H. We could do an upstroke, we could do an ascending loop, and a compound curve. And then we have the letter H. So we're just combining the basic strokes in different ways to make up almost all of the lowercase letters. Here are the lowercase letters. We're going to go through each one. This guide is really meant to be for tracing, but you can also just do your own practice on your tracing paper as well, where you're not tracing, you're just practicing your letters. So for the letter A, we'll start with an O form. And then we have our underturn. B is going to be a long downstroke, a reversed O form, and a stylized upstroke. Now we have the letter C, which is basically just an O form. We start at 2 o'clock and kick the bottom out to the right instead of connecting it. D, we have an O form, and then we have a long downstroke and an underturn. And we're just making sure that we're ending all our letters at the waistline. That's going to help us when we start connecting our letters. E, we're starting halfway between the waistline and the baseline to create a small loop. We go into an O form and then kick the bottom out and to the right. F is going to be the longest letter. We're starting with a stylized upstroke into an ascending loop, into a descending loop, and an upstroke. You'll notice on some of these examples, they don't quite go down to all of the guidelines, and so that's okay. You can follow that to give it more of a bounced look, or if you want, you can do it all the way to the baseline like this example. G is going to be an O form and a descending loop and an upstroke. H is a long downstroke with a compound curve. I is going to be an underturn with a dot. J, a descending loop with an upstroke and dot the J. K is a long downstroke, a reverse O form, and an angled underturn. It's going at more of an angle than an underturn is. Next is L, which is going to be ascending loop and an underturn in one. M is a downstroke, overturn, compound curve. And as needed, you can go back and fix anything if you're going too quickly. N is going to be a downstroke, and a compound curve. O is going to be an O form with a comma dot. So a comma dot's really used as a connecting letter. P is a really long downstroke, a reverse O form, and a stylized upstroke. Q is going to be an O form, a reflected descending loop, and an upstroke. R is going to be an upstroke, and a little jog here. R is considered an outlier letter, so it does not fall within the basic strokes. So we've got that upstroke that comes above the waistline, this little jog, which is different, into an underturn, which we already know. Next is going to be S. This one's going to have an upstroke, and it's also an outlier, so we're going to come down and around and up. So upstroke, down and around and up. And those outlier letters, they just take a little bit more practice because they're not using the basic strokes. Next is T. This one's going to be a long downstroke with an underturn with what's called a crossbar. Then we've got U, which is 2 underturns. V, which is going to be a compound curve. And a comma dot. Next we've got W, which is going to be an underturn, and a comma dot. And our last 3 letters, X is also an outlier. we start with a portion of a compound curve. You can see it doesn't go all the way up. The ends are cut off, and then we have kind of the stylized upstroke to cross it. Then we have Y, which is an underturn, and this descending loop with an upstroke. And lastly, we have Z, come down at a diagonal and across. This one's not really in the basic strokes either. Something that you're going to notice with a large brush pen are that these letters are quite large. And that's just the nature. We're using a larger tip, a larger tool, so our letters are going to be larger. And so you want to take that into consideration when you're deciding what projects to use a large brush pen on, is that you will just want to make sure that you do have enough room to complete your lettering. So using this on an A2 card is great. Anything smaller, and you're going to, unless it's a name or something short, you're probably going to run out of room with this large of a pen. So that's all of the lowercase letters, walking you through those. Now let's talk about connecting these letters. So let's talk about connecting letters. There's two things we want to look out for. The first thing is high connection points. So if we take a word, so we've got this word, and we ended all of our letters at the waistline. So that gives us high connection points. Let me show you one more example. If we don't use that, if we just decide we're just going to end down here wherever we feel like it, then you can see the difference. First, this one is easier to read, which is our whole goal with lettering. Second, using high connection points and connecting up here creates these little pockets of negative space, and that's what makes it easier to read. Where here we don't have any of that negative space, and it makes it harder to read. So anytime you're doing a letter, you want to make sure that you're ending it up here at the waistline so that it's ready to connect to the next letter. The only exception for that would be if your next letter is the letter E, because as we know, E starts at the waistline. So we could stop here, so then we could go into our E. And it still creates that pocket and enough space, but if we go all the way up, sometimes it can go above the E. So that's a little bit about high connection points. The other thing that you want to consider is just your space between letters. So for example, if we were to write the word new, the space between these letters from the N to the E and the E to the W is called kerning. And we just want to have consistent kerning in our lettering. So this would be like a regular spacing. We could try something. It's harder to do a tight kerning with a large brush pen because it's such a big pen, but you can see the space between is very small. We could do something really wide. Like this, and have really wide kerning. None of these are right and wrong. My recommendation is that you kind of choose one with the word that you're working with or the composition and kind of stick to it instead of going regular to tight to wide to tight to regular and bouncing around. Just choose one and stick with it with your lettering composition or with your word or your phrase. I want to walk you through the uppercase letters now. So these uppercase letters are not based on the basic strokes, and they're definitely stylized. They're close to an all caps, which is nice and easy, especially for a large brush pen. So this is definitely a beginner-friendly alphabet style for a large brush pen. So let's start with the letter A, and we'll just go through each of these. It's basically like a large overturn, where we're starting here at the baseline. We come up with light pressure, come back down, and then we're going to use a crossbar to cross. B is going to have a long downstroke, and we got 2 reverse O forms here. The capital C is much like the lowercase c, where we're starting at the 2 o'clock position, we work our way around into an O form, and instead of connecting it, we just end at the waistline. D is going to be a long downstroke with a reverse O form. I said these are not made up of the basic strokes, and generally they aren't, but there are still a few basic strokes in them. E, this is more like an all caps E, where we've got a long downstroke, and then we've just got 3 lines coming horizontally. Next we have F, very similar to the E, long downstroke, and the lines coming horizontally. G is going to be like the C, where we've got our O form, horizontal line. Next is H. Got a downstroke, downstroke, crossbar. I is just going to be one long downstroke. J is going to be a downstroke, kind of like an underturn, but we're going this direction. K is going to be a long downstroke, a stroke down into an underturn. And L, we have a long downstroke and that horizontal line. Next we have M, we have a thin line up, and remember we're coming down thick, up thin, down thick. And we've got a nice downstroke, then overturn. The O is just an O form, that makes it easy, just a little larger. P, we've got a long downstroke, reverse O form, and the P is going to come a little bit lower than the waistline. Next we have Q, which is going to be an O form. And we'll add the tail. R is a long downstroke, reverse O form, underturn. S is like an all caps S. The whole center part is where our thickness is. T is going to be a long downstroke, horizontal line to cross. We've got U, which is an underturn and an underturn. V, downstroke, thin line. W, very similar to the V. X, got our downstroke and our upstroke. And then we just got the last 2 letters, Y, which is an underturn, and Z. So obviously you could get more stylized with these. This is kind of a combination of a lettered and an all capped, but it is really easy to do with a large brush pen. So it's definitely great if you're just getting started with large brush pens. That was everything that I have to share today. Please let me know what questions you have in the comments about the basic strokes, the lowercase letters, connecting strokes, connecting letters, or the uppercase letters, and I'm happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much for watching this brush lettering workshop. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'm super excited for you to jump into this style and learn how to do large brush lettering.